Good morning. Today we'll be talking about understanding neurodiversity. And with me, I have two very lovely people to speak about it. Good morning, Mrs. Adewole and Brian. It's a pleasure to have both of you with us on the program. If I might start with you, Mrs. Adewole, can I ask you a question? The question is, why neurodiversity? Why did you start school? I know you have a very important school that you've set up here in Lagos. Can you tell us a bit about the school and explain to us why you started it?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajayi, for having me. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure to be here on Doctors on Air. So the Learning Innovation Academy is the school that you referred to. Learning Innovation Academy is an offshoot of the Learning Place Center. The Learning Place Center is a day school for boys and girls with autism and other related developmental disorders. And it's been in existence for 14 years. And somewhere down the line in 2022, we realized that the students that we were nurturing at the Learning Place Center graduated and didn't really have where to go to. And we just had to think, went back to the drawing board on how to provide a place for them so that they can carry on with their learning. So that's what really helped us start the Learning Innovation Academy. Learning Innovation Academy is an inclusive institute of creativity, technology, and art focused on equipping youth and young adults with essential skills for entrepreneurship. So our focus there is just basically to identify talents, identify skills, and make the most of it with them. And we collaborate with diverse stakeholders and communities through different programs. One of the collaborators we have is Treffert Center, amongst many others. We met Treffert Center sometime in 2023, and ever since then, we've been on this journey because they're quite versed also in neurodiversity, and they're versed in strength-based approach, which I'll come to explain to you later as the approach that we use at our center. But I'll stop here for now. So that
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, can I say that the Learning Place is like a primary, secondary school, and the Innovation Academy is like a university?
You can say that.
Would that be fair? Would that be fair? Huh?
Yes, it will be fair to say the Learning Place Center is like a primary school. So there is the Learning Place, which is a different school. That's a Montessori school, but the Learning Place Center is the one for children with autism. So the Learning Place Center, yes, can be referred to as a primary school because it caters for children aged 1 through 12, whilst the Learning Innovation Academy caters for students aged 16 all the way to 25.
Perfect. Okay, so I have an understanding of that. So Brian, if I can move over to you. Thank you very much for coming from the Treffert Place too. And thank you also for your support of the Innovation Academy and what you're doing for us here in Nigeria. But what we are here on this program, basically what we want to understand, because there are a lot of people out there, they've heard of autism, they've heard of this, they've heard of that, but nobody really understands what neurodiversity is, because the term now is neurodiversity, isn't it? No longer autism. So what is neurodiversity? Can you explain it? Can you explain it? Is it some sort of scientific concept or is it a social concept?
That's a great question, and thanks for having me. It does kind of bridge both sides. So neurodiversity is looking at the way different brains do different things. So in a technical sense, we're all neurodiverse. Everybody's brain might do a particular project or activity, but we all might do it in a slightly different way neurologically. But just because we might struggle in some ways, if we look at neurodiversity from kind of the scientific perspective, we might all be neurodiverse, but we all don't need daily support. So that's probably the biggest differential when we talk about it from the perspective of like a scientific or a diagnosis. So then it's like, who might need additional supports to be able to do particular things? So then
Mhm.
we look at like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, some aspects of anxiety and depression, and we put all of them into this idea of neurodiversity, in which they might not be able to do things in a typical way, but they often have amazing skills and abilities in their particularly gifted area.
Okay, that's very interesting because I was going to ask you what conditions fall under neurodiversity, but you've already answered that. So some people say is neurodiversity then because they can't cope? Does that make them, does it make it a mental health disorder? Does it make it a neurological disorder? What's the difference between neurodiversity and a neurological disorder, for example? How would you put it? How would you explain that?
Well, I would really put them together so that it's the neurological disorder that might make them neurodiverse.
Okay.
So for instance, if we looked at autism, they often have struggles in the areas of socialization. So they might struggle with like English classes, where they have to understand the social context of the writing that they're reading. And that might be very difficult because the rest of us can grab onto like our own experience to interpret the reading that we're doing. Well, if you don't have those experiences, then understanding what you're reading becomes a real struggle. But people with autism often have such amazing abilities that goes past mastery in certain areas of like science, music, art, mathematics. People with ADHD often can handle the stress of like deadlines looming better. People with dyslexia have better visual spatial abilities than typical people. And the real problem comes that the world we've created is for people who we would consider not needing support, not needing supports. Um, and it's not made for people who might have some of these struggles. But if you focus on what they're really good at, they do amazing things.
Okay, so I think that's I think is also helpful to know because when we talk about things that, some the society doesn't really support what we call neurodivergent individuals. There's people who sort of, diverge from the norm, as it were. And it's because we've created a normal world that is fixed on certain aspects of things and not on all aspects of things. So if we can just, I don't know, if we can just go into it and maybe just like, I'll just jump back to Mrs. Adewole here and say, how is it in Nigeria? How are you finding this? Because he's talking about all the wonderful things that, autistic children can do. Are you able to bring that out in our children? Do they have that kind of opportunity here? How can we find it? How can we get it expressed?
So the opportunity here is very limited because we normally will focus on the deficits in the child. So when we meet somebody that's neurodiverse, the first thing we ordinarily would think about is how to fix the child. We want to fix what's not working. So the IEP, which is the individual educational plan that is designed, normally would have tasks of things they want to achieve and goals to achieve in view of what the child cannot do. Whereas in the actual sense, we're finding more and more that the strengths-based approach is more beneficial. It's beneficial to you, the educator, as well as the child, because as the educator, you struggle less. You find that you're able to evoke this desired behavior when you focus more on the child's interests, the child's talents, the child's strengths, and then you're able to get the child to do many more things as opposed to you focusing on the deficit. But as a general thing in Nigeria, we find that quite a number of teachers may not be as creative as we need them to be. So there's a need for training, a need for getting them up to speed, to expose them to many different types of literature that's going to enlighten them, give practical workshops and all of those things that will help the teacher see better, and even the parents as well, because parents also typically will shy away from a child who may not be talking at the expected age. So when we look at the milestones of the child, and we're expecting that the child has a certain number of words by a certain age, and if those words are not there, some parents are quickly in denial mode, and they don't want to accept, they don't want to admit, and this is just because of the norm that we have created. And besides the norm, there's also the stigma. You know, the stigma culture is also still a big one within our environment, and people tend to want to not admit that there's anything going on because they don't want to be stigmatized. And in the process, they're losing time, because we do know that early intervention is key. And the earlier you started intervention or giving the child intervention, the better it is that the prognosis becomes. But when you take so much time not facing it, then it lingers for much longer. So yes, in Nigeria, we're still work in progress, but each day gets better, and we just keep moving. And with programs like this, the awareness continues, and we hope that many more people will know that if they focus on the strengths and talents, they'll get much more out of the child.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Adewole, for coming on the program. You know, one of the reasons why we decided to do this program is normally all programs about autism take place around the World Autism Day, and then they forget about autism until that time comes. But it's so important that we understand that autistic people are people, they live among us. There's a spectrum, and we shouldn't consider them as people we only talk about at a specific time of the year and look at them as if, oh, they have a problem, or they have a disability. And even recognizing some of the people who have some of those talents and some of those issues within our normal society to enable us make the best of them and, enjoy them, as it were. So can you break it down? Because people, have asked if you can break down a bit, what is autism? And really, what is neurodivergence? Just as simply as you can.
Okay, so neurodivergence to me is just a different brain. And what that basically means is the way I process information is different from the way the next person processes information. However, in processing information, because we have the norm, we have what we expect as normal, regular, standard behaviors. Once a person's brain that is processing differently falls outside the normal standard behaviors, then we think there's something wrong. I'll give an example of a classroom setting, for instance, where you have children who are supposed to be sitting for circle time. And there's this one child who every time circle time starts, prefers to stand up, roam around the classroom, and he's knocking things off the shelf. This child is thinking differently. There's something going on. There's always an antecedent for behavior. So something is going on that has spurred the child on. But if we feel that because of that behavior, this child is automatically removed from the setting, that we might not be able to help the child or get through to him. But what is clear is that his behavior is different, and it's something that is going on with his brain that is triggering the difference in the behavior. So that's what we call neurodiverse. With autism is a triad. I always like to explain it from 3 places. It's a triad of disorders. The first will be repetitive stereotypic behavior. I know that's a big word, but I'm going to break it down. So what we see is the child or the individual in repetitive stereotypic movements. So all the time, this child is doing the same thing, wanting things to be done the same way. We want to go through the same route every day. So when they're going home, if mom should dare take a different turn, it's a big problem. There's a big meltdown because that has happened. Or a child who's spinning the wheels of a toy or whatever, or a child who comes in and is reacting to light, sensory as well, who reacts to light, reacts to loud sounds and all of those things. That will be under the repetitive stereotypic. Then we have communication and language disorder. That will be the second of the triad. Now, the communication and language disorder basically means this child is not nonverbal, which means they're not talking at all, or if they're talking, they are not talking in a social back and forth way. They normally will monopolize conversations in the sense that you are talking about a particular topic. So as a teacher, you introduce a topic about airplanes, and this child is telling you about the train that went on in the tunnel, and the train went fast, and the wheels, and the child is talking only about the trait and is so fixated on everything about the trait. Meanwhile, that is not the conversation at hand. So a child who does that is going, well, we call it off point also. So this child has gone off the point of the actual discussion, and you find it in some adults as well. You know, adults who have been able to manage themselves well and have grown up living with some disorder, or one disorder, in one form or the other, will also, there'll be people that we'll call the obnoxious people. We think they're obnoxious, they're always rude, they're always opinionated, but really and truly what it is they're probably dealing with something that is also a difference in their brain, which we need to all learn how to embrace. The third of the triad will be lack of social skills. So their social skills are just what? It's not what, well, still based on this norm that we've created. We're expecting them to go and initiate conversations. For some of them, they don't initiate conversation. They can just push. They push somebody else, or they go to them and start making faces. And the other person is thinking, why are you making faces at me? But what it really is I'm trying to say hello. I'm trying to be friends with you, but I just have a different way of communicating it. So I think when everyone is enlightened, when we all know that these are the signs, when we know the specific signs of autism, there are quite a number of characteristics of autism that we'd also see. Things like them not pointing at a young age, they're walking on tippy toes, they're not talking, they're not making eye contact. You know, those are all some of the things that we will see that would help us begin to see, we call them red flags. So these are the red flags that we see that make us know something may not be right, something is going on, and then we start to investigate further to get a solution.
Okay, I think so. I think this is very helpful. What you've just said is very, very helpful. And what I would like to, maybe ask is that, people are hearing us today, and a lot of people know that there's an increase in autism. There's been an increase in what we call neurodiversity in our society. It's ongoing. But when people see these children, everybody wants their child to be quote unquote normal. So how do are some of these traits that you're describing, are they lifelong? Are there traits that can be adjusted over time? Are these things that, because you've talked about working in your school, focusing on the positive, focusing on the positive aspects. If they grow in their positive aspects, does it mean they also lose some of the negative aspects? What kind of hope do you think is there for a mother with an autistic child who's listening to you right now?
Okay, so scientifically, to date, there is no cure for autism. However, there is treatment for autism. And with the treatments, once you've started intervention, there are different types of treatments. There's the ABA, there's the floor time, there is playtime, different types of therapies that one can adopt. But once you have started the intervention, you start to see reductions in the undesired behavior, and you start to see more of the desired. Depends on the kind of intervention that you give. A lot of things are measured scientifically when we start to treat the children with autism. And once we know what it is, then we're able to give them whichever. But the bottom line is there is no cure, but the treatment will make some of the traits that we see that are of concern diminish. They begin to diminish, and sometimes some of them even get extinct altogether, because there's also something called extinction that we start to do with them. But when you start to try to get rid of a behavior, it gets worse. We call it extinction burst in ABA. It gets worse before it starts to normalize and become what you want it to be. So we have seen children over the years, and adults as well, the young adults, who have started out very hyperactive, who would run back and forth. But once you start to put the intervention in on a daily basis, giving them some hours, and based on their IP, they're dispensing the program to them, we find that they start to mellow and things start to change. They start to understand what to do, where to sit, how to sit, when to sit, and all of those things. And the behavior starts to get better, and we start to see less and less of the traits that we do not want. But I am not sure they completely go away. They still are somewhere there, even as they grow older. There's a residue somewhere, but it just may not affect their functional lives as much as it would have if they didn't get intervention.
Thank you. I think that's very useful. If I can ask Brian, how is autism, how is neurodiversity viewed in the US? I want to talk about different cultures. You're coming from the US. Is it far more accepted there?
You
And
know,
people then for example, it would be here. I mean, I'll be going back to Mrs. Adewole to talk about that.
listening to the conversation, it's very similar here to than the description that we're hearing in the conversation today. We're a deficit-based society. So we often look at what can't you do and let's fix the things you can't do. Now you would think from a neurologically perspective, if your brain can't do those things, then spending a lot of time in those areas is just wasted time. If the brain could do those things, it would do those things. So when we see people kind of struggling to focus on those deficits, we see very small progress. But when we focus on the strengths, we see exponential growth in all areas. So now we say, why is that? Well, it could be like for especially people with autism. And let's take somebody who is interested in music. When they can engage with people through their music, that gives them an entrance into like social interactions. So then they have something that they're very excited about that people come to them and talk to them about. And then that gives them more opportunity to practice those social relationships within the context of the thing that they're very excited about. If you take a kid with ADHD and you find out that he's a guitar player and he can be in a rock band, well, that expands his social understanding. And if he wants more of that, he'll engage in those kinds of activities that are supposed to happen within the context of what we say normal, to be able to engage with those types of things. And then what we see is that it seems like within the context of their gifts and talents, the high end is beyond what typical people are capable of accomplishing without far more practice and experience. So we're dealing with the same sort of struggles in the United States that you are. There is getting people to understand that a strength-based perspective is invaluable when it comes to working with people with neurodiversity.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. Now, unfortunately, time is up. You won't believe this conversation just feels as like it just started, and yet it's almost over. So, Mrs. Adewale, if I can just go back to you, we're talking about cultures, etc. We just want a few last words for our listeners, and just speak to us in the context of our own cultures and our own, peculiarities here in Nigeria, and just give us some words of advice.
So what I'll say is to everybody out there, for every child that you see, believe in them. Don't let the stigma affect you. Don't let what other people think about you or your child affect what you do with your child. It's extremely important that you face what you have and face the child in front of you and make all the difference that you need to make with that child. Everyone is sorting out their own life, so you sort yours out as well by not looking at everyone. Thank you.
Now, the last thing, sorry. Can you give us a number for those who want to reach out to you to talk to you and perhaps find out more about your school? Can you give us a number that they can call?
Yes, so that will be 0907 007 1410.
And again, please.
Yeah, so it's 0907 007 1410 and 1411.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the program. Thank you, Bryan, for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for new video updates.